Welcome to Module 2, where we shall be working with text and basic HTML elements. We shall look at text formatting and lists. If you're excited about this, let us dive right in. To start us off, I have an empty HTML document just with the basic structure with nothing in the body section. And I will go ahead and paste some random text in it. I already have my live server running. On the right side, you can see the browser. And here on the left, you can see VS Code running. And notice that when I save my HTML document, it immediately appears in the browser. So at this point, there is really nothing to distinguish the text. What is the heading? What is the paragraph? Nothing of the sort. So to start us off, we can add in a heading tag. And the first heading tag we can add is the H1 tag. So we open the tag H1 and add that in. And immediately we save, we can see in the browser that we have HTML hierarchy being the title of the page. And that already starts to give us some form of structure, especially when we are reading the text. For the following text, we can now add in the paragraph tag and tell the browser like, hey, the text that is remaining, or that is just the paragraph tag. And when you look at the screen, there's really no change. But in reality, we have added in some structure. And this is super important when it comes to screen readers. And as a rule of thumb, remember what we talked about in the previous video. If you haven't watched it, you can check it out in the link above. Always have one H1 tag. Don't repeat H1 tags. You are free to repeat the other heading tags, for example, heading 1 to heading 6. But when it comes to H1, just limit it to one H1 per page. And that is the way they are intended to be used to create hierarchy and structure. So let us say you have a second paragraph. How would you add that in? And you can just come in, add another paragraph, and boom, we can close that off. And you can see that, hey, we are now starting to get a bit of structure. Second paragraph, we can add in another paragraph. And always remember to close your tags. And immediately we can see that we are starting to get a structure of some sort. And if we need another heading, maybe after the first paragraph, we can add in, let's say, for example, H2. And we can just use the same title or a different title. It doesn't matter. And under that, we can obviously have H3. And we can already see that we are getting a bit of structure. And it is becoming super clear to the reader or the consumer of your content that, hey, text is moving from here, this hierarchy or this level, to this next level. And this is how the text is structured. One thing to point out is when it comes to the text tags or text formatting tags, for instance, the H1s and the paragraph, nesting is not allowed. For instance, if I come here and then nest the paragraph tag inside the heading tag, that is not a valid HTML syntax. But we have other elements that can be nested inside the heading tags and the paragraph tags. So let us quickly look at those type of tags. And to give us space, I will remove everything below that. A good example is what is referred to as line break tags. For example, we can see that the first sentence ends, then there is the start of the second sentence. But what if I want the second sentence to begin on a new line? That is where the line break tag comes in. And I can just add it in, BR. And we can clearly see in the browser that the second sentence jumps to the next line. But something of importance that you will realize is, hey, the line break tag is not wrapping any other content. And that is right, because the line break tag is what we refer to as self-closing tag, and some other text will also refer to it as void element, a void element. And these are tags that don't wrap around any text or any content. A good example is line break. We have others like image tags, but don't worry about those. We shall look at them later in this series. Another tag that can be used inside the paragraph tag or any other text formatting tag is, let's say, for example, a strong tag. Let's say, for example, we want to make this text strong. You can say strong. And in our browsers, we can see that it is made bold. Another interesting one is what is referred to as the emphasis tag. And we can choose just any other word. For example, let us emphasize what kind of browser. And we use EM. And we can see that it italicizes the word. But let us stop for a minute. There are other tags that can do the same things that these two tags do. For example, instead of using emphasis, I can say italicize. And we can get the same effect in the browser. And instead of using the strong tag, we can just use the bold tag. And we get the same effect in the browser. So what is the difference between these two types of tags? These are what we refer to as presentational tags. That is the italicize and bold tag. And as a rule of thumb, avoid them. Avoid them. Because they don't have the same effect, especially when somebody is using a screen reader. The previous tag that we used, that is strong and emphasis, these are what we refer to as semantic tags. And when somebody who is using a screen reader to consume your content, the screen reader sees this, it has a different effect, or the screen reader will interpret the text in a different way. So as a rule of thumb, always use semantic tags. For example, EM, emphasis and strong, rather than italicize and bold tags. Some other examples of text or semantic tags are what we refer to. A good example is the mark tag. For example, if we want to highlight a portion of the text, we can just use mark. Oops, I have a typo. Mark. So open tag mark and then paste in the text, and we can clearly see that it is used to highlight a portion of the text. And as always, this is super important when it comes to screen readers. Another good example is block quote. For example, you have a quote that you want to add it in. You can use a block quote tag. And the final one that we shall look at is code tag. You have a piece of code that you want to add into your text. And you can see that it changes the font of the text into something that appears geeky or code. So these are examples of semantic tags, and there are tons of them, but for the purposes of this tutorial, we shall only look at these four. So what are the next steps once you have learned, hey, we have heading 1 to heading 6, we have paragraph tags, we have semantic tags. Another simple example or practice exercise that you can do for yourself is, can I be able to create a simple resume page using the knowledge that I've gained now? And that is very possible. So think about it. We can start and say, okay, H1, my resume. We can go in and say, hey, paragraph 1, welcome to my professional portfolio. I specialize, another paragraph. I specialize in, let us make it strong, front end and emphasize, can use emphasize, user experience design. And check that out. Just from the basic knowledge that we have acquired today, that is just using text formatting tags, we can see that we can create a simple resume page of our portfolio. My resume, welcome to my professional portfolio. And using the semantic tags, we have emphasized front-end development and user experience design. The next thing that we shall look at is lists. And when it comes to HTML, we have 3 types of lists. The first type is what we refer to as the ordered list, or let us start with an ordered list. And we can see an ordered list is just a list of items that have the bullet in front of them. And this is specifically used for items that don't require any order per se. So if you have list items and you want to list them in no particular order, then the unordered list can be used. But let us say that you want to have some bit of order in your list. That is where the ordered list comes in. So instead of UL, the way to define an ordered list is just ordered list, closing, and then we have the same list items in them. And when we save it, we can clearly see that before the list item text, we have numbers, 1 to 3 in this case. But what if we don't want them to be numbers? What do we do? Let us say, for example, we want alphabets. And that is where the type parameter comes in. And if we just change it to a capital A, we can see that we get A, B, and C. And notice when I change this to lowercase a, the alphabet changes to lowercase. And if we want the Roman character, same thing. I can use capital I, and we have it in Roman. And if I change it to lowercase, still Roman, but in lowercase. And you might wonder, what is this type? And as a way of introduction, that type is what we refer to as attributes. An attribute. So HTML tags have what we call the closing tag and the closing body. And we are also able to define attributes in them. So in this case, this is specific to the ordered list. but we have what we refer to as global tags, which can be defined on all HTML tags. But we shall look more into that in a future class. The last type of list that we shall look at is what we refer to as a definition list or the description list. So a description list is interesting in a way that we shall have a description title, and then finally we shall have the description. And the description title sometimes is referred to as the description term or the term. And it is basically used to describe the item. Then we have the description under it. And in order for us to describe it, first we have the opening tag, which is the description list, DL. And then we have the description title. And in this case, let us say HTML. Oops. And then below it, we have the description. Boom. And we can clearly see that this is the term and this is the description that we have. So how do we add in the second element? And the second list element that we can add in is just the same way, the two. Then we can say, for example, CSS. And what does CSS do? It stands for Cascading Style Sheet. So we can clearly see that this is definition list, item 1. And this is item 2. And maybe you can add in a third item, item 3, JS. And that is JavaScript. I've introduced a new thing in the document, and maybe it is important that we go it. So what are these? And in HTML, this is what we refer to as comments. And comments are basically ignored when it comes to rendering the content in the browser. Comments will only be visible or are important to the person editing the HTML document. For example, you can see, hey, I'm reminding myself or the next person who will come to edit this page, like, hey, this is the first item in the list. This is the second item in the list. So it is only used by the developer or somebody who is editing the document, and it will not be rendered in the browser. It will be ignored. Awesome. So the last thing that we shall do is, let us try it now to take this a notch higher. We have learned about text formatting. We have learned about lists. So let us try to use them to write our simple resume page. And in order to do that, we can just go back to the basics and say H1, my resume. We can use an ordered list for this section, and we immediately get a very nice list of education, experience, and skills. And let us say, for example, when it comes to education, we want it to be ordered. The beauty about this is we can also nest these lists. And in this case, we can use an ordered list. Oops. Can you use an ordered list and close it out? And you can clearly see in the browser that, hey, we have education. The first one is high school, college, so on and so forth. So you will notice that for things that require order, it is good you use the ordered list. And for things that don't require any specific order, you can go ahead and use the unordered list. So what are the key takeaways from this class? Number one, always use semantic tags instead of presentational tags. Number two, use lists to organize your content logically. And finally, as we said in the last class, always validate your HTML. And you can use the online HTML validator. The link to that tool is in the description section of this video. So if you have liked the value that you have received from this video, watch the next. So if you have liked what you have seen and you have learned something from this video, let us go to the next video where we shall learn more about links, images, and so much more. See you in the next one.